So today's video is about setting up and solving proportions. So let's start with what is a proportion. A proportion are two ratios that are equal. So the best way to help you understand a proportion is to actually give you an example. So let's do an example about lemonade. So if you have your favorite recipe for lemonade, let's say your favorite recipe to make your famous lemonade is that you're going to use 5 cups of water and then 3 lemons. And then we're not even going to get into the sugar, but let's just talk about the water and the lemon. So you're going to use 3 lemons and 5 cups of water to make your famous lemonade. Now, that's only going to make you 1 pitcher, but let's say you're having a big party and you've got to make a couple pitchers. Well, you want to make sure that no matter how many pitchers of the lemonade you make, you want to make sure it tastes the same, so that whether someone gets lemonade out of the first pitcher or out of the second or the 5th pitcher, that everyone can be raving about how good your lemonade is. So in order to do that, you have to make sure that you have an equal ratio of lemons to water, and your ratio is 3 lemons for every 5 cups of water. So if I know that I have to have this ratio, then if I were to find some equal ratios, then that's the way I can make sure that my lemonade will taste the same no matter what. And that's called a proportion. So a proportion is when you have 2 ratios that are equal. So here, let's say I needed to do 3 pitchers of lemonade. Well, that means instead of using 3 lemons, I'm going to have to use 9 lemons. And instead of using 5 cups of water, I'm going to have to use 15 cups of water. But because I can multiply 3 and 5, both of them by 3 to get 9 and 15, that means that these 2 ratios are equal, and that means that they are in proportion. So we would say that they are in proportion to one another. So how do you set up proportions? Well, to set up a proportion, you set the 2 ratios equal to each other, and the ratios have to follow the same order. So that means you have to decide what's going to go on the top and what's going to go on the bottom. What unit will be on the top and then what unit will be on the bottom, and the other ratio has to follow that exact same order. And sometimes you may have a value that's missing, and we're going to start using a variable in place of that. So if we look at this example here, you use 2 parts of red and 3 parts of white to make pink paint. Well, let's say your friend wants to make the same shade of pink, but they need to have more pink paint. Well, then they decided that they'll do 4 parts of red and 6 parts of white to make the same shade of pink. And so we're going to set these up as a proportion. So your ratio is here, the 2 red to the 3 white. That's your mixture. And then your friend's mixture is here. And notice how we have the red at the top and the white at the bottom on both of the ratios. So when you're setting up a proportion, you have to make sure that your ratios follow the same order. So one thing that you can do is check to see if ratios form a proportion, because not all ratios form a proportion. So you may have 2 ratios that the statement may say that they're equal to each other, but they may not be. So here is how you can actually check to see if 2 ratios form a proportion. If 2 ratios form a proportion, that means their cross products would be equal. So that means if you were to multiply the 2 numbers diagonal from each other, then they should be equal on either side. So if we look at this example here, we want to know if 2 pounds to $1 is equal to 10 pounds to $5. So what we'll do is we'll do the cross products. We'll multiply 2 times 5, and that gives us 10. And then we'll multiply the other side, 1 times 10, and that also gives us 10. Well, because both sides of the equation equal 10, then that means that these 2 ratios are equivalent and they are in proportion. So let's look at this example. We want to see if these ratios form a proportion. So we have 2 boys for every 3 girls, and we want to know if that is an equal ratio to 6 boys for every 9 girls. So the first thing we have to do is we have to do our cross products. We're going to multiply the numbers diagonal from each other. So I'll start by doing 6 times 3 and then 9 times 2. Well, we know that 6 times 3 gives us 18 and 9 times 2 gives us 18. And since they are the same, then we would say that yes, they are in proportion. So then let's look at this. We have 2 boys for every 3 girls, and we're saying that we have 10 boys to 20 girls. So again, we want to do our cross products. And we'll notice that one side, 2 times 20, gives us 40, and the other side, 10 times 3, gives us 30. Well, because 40 does not equal 30, then that means these two ratios are not in proportion because they are not equal to each other. So in order to see if ratios form a proportion, you simply check the cross products. So now here is how to solve a proportion. So sometimes they're going to give you 3 of the values of the proportion and ask you to find the missing value. So the first thing you have to do is set up your proportion. Then once you've set up the proportion, you're going to pick a variable to put in place of the missing value. Then once you've done that, you're going to cross multiply, and then you're going to solve the equation to find the value of the variable. So let's do this example. So you drive 140 miles in 10 minutes. How far will you have driven after 25 minutes? So the first step is to set up our proportion. So our first ratio is 140 miles in 10 minutes. So we're going to set that ratio up over here. Then our second ratio is how far will you have driven after 25 minutes? Well, I know 25 minutes will be a part of my second ratio, and I don't know the number of miles, but that's what they're asking me for. So that means I've got to put 25 minutes as a part of my second ratio, and because 10 minutes is at the bottom of the first ratio, I've got to put 25 minutes at the bottom of the second ratio. Then step 2, we're going to use a variable in place of the missing value. Well, the missing value is we don't know how many miles we drove in 25 minutes. So instead of putting a number there, for right now, we're just going to have to use a variable. And for right now, we'll just use X. So then the third step is to cross multiply. That means we are going to multiply the numbers that are diagonal from each other. So on one side, we're going to multiply 140 times 25, and you'll see we have that here. Then on the other side, we're going to multiply 10 times X, and you'll see that we have that here. Well, 140 times 25 gives us 3,500, and then 10 times X gives us just 10X, because we don't know what X is yet. Then our last step is that we have to actually solve the equation. And we learned this earlier in the year, how to solve an equation. So we want to figure out what X is, what our missing number is. So that means because 10X is a symbol for multiplication, in order for us to figure out what X is, we have to use the opposite, which is division. So we're actually going to divide by 10. And whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other side to make sure that our equation is balanced. So we're going to do 10X divided by 10, which leaves us with just X. And then we're going to do 3,500 divided by 10, which gives us 350. So now we know that 350 equals X. And we know that X stands for the number of miles we can drive in 25 minutes. So that means that because X is 350, we can now say that we will travel 350 miles in 25 minutes. So remember, a proportion is two ratios that are equal to each other. You can check to see if ratios are in proportion by doing their cross products, and you can use a proportion to solve ratio word problems by using a variable in place of your missing value, and again using cross multiplication and then solving an equation.